My understanding, and remember earlier this summer I asked you for the buildings that the community colleges have spent their CITF fee on the last few years. They already, Michael, do it for like academic facilities. And while they are suffering just as we are with the PICO situation, I don't know that the suffering is as great because they've had that source that has not been available to the SUS. And I've been beaten up on Chris a long time about these issues. But anyway, it is worth looking at how they've expended their funds in order to run their academic programs. I mean, the students, you know, there's been no gripes or, you know, anything.
Michael? Matt?
Chris, would that fee be handled the same as the current CITF, or would it be given to the university, and the university have the authority to bond the fee in each individually?
As I've heard it presented, it would be like that, where the university would actually set that fee. It might be subject to some of the same limitations in terms of, you know, the university may not be able to impose the full 10% all in one go. Maybe it could, it would have to be phased in, so it's not this like immediate huge burden on it. And this was sort of proposed as an alternative. One of the concepts discussed earlier, and I think it's further on to say, let's just charge a small percentage of tuition, perhaps up to 5% of base tuition, allow that to be bonded for facilities. In talking to Ben Watkins, and he said, you already have an established program under the cap, and you were there, of course, but for those who weren't, you already have an established program for the CITF. If you're going to charge a fee to the students, if you're charging them a set amount of money, financially there's no real difference whether it's a fee or whether it's a percentage of tuition and it just increases. You're still getting a charge against the student. Rather than creating a new program, it's unrated debt, it's an unrated credit, use the auspices of your existing program and the process so that you can roll it out faster and hopefully get some efficiencies, get a bigger bang for your buck. So that's where this was sort of in lieu of charging a certain percentage of tuition. It would be a fee versus a set aside of tuition.
In some of my discussions too, that seemed to get some traction because it was felt like it was new money that could help us. That didn't come from the legislature, but came from the universities. Michael?
I should already know the answer to this, but the purpose for the already existing building fee that universities already have, is that building fee used for construction or is that used for maintenance?
What happened? That's a good question.
Yeah.
There was two fees. There was a building fee and a capital improvement fee, but they were always used for the same purpose, for student facilities. The only real distinction was a legal distinction. The building fee predated the capital improvement fee. A few of the senior institutions, their system had imposed a building fee and it was legally pledged for those projects. So the capital improvement fee was added, literally over 50 years ago. As part of the legislation that allowed the increase for capital improvement fee, the building fee was done away with. So because it was really just a legal, it no longer had a legal reason to exist.
There were no
So
bonds.
spring of 2012 was its last.
Yeah, I believe spring, beginning of summer 2012 was the last time there would have been a building fee. It ended July 1 of this year, and now there's only the capital improvement fee, but it combines what used to be the building fee and the capital improvement fee. For many years, they've really been one and the same. Historically, I don't think there was any distinction either, other than, like I said, a few institutions, UF and FSU come to mind, had some very old bond series. UF had the last one. It was a 1957 series, and it finally paid off a couple years ago. So there no longer was a legal reason to have a distinction.
Okay, and then one more question, if I may. With overall student support towards construction of new facilities, that would be capped at 20%. So you're including CITF in there. Because I'm 20% of tuition.
Yeah, that would be the maximum cap, that it would cap at 20% of tuition, and it wouldn't, and that's what the college system has now. Now, just to state for the record, no one in the college system is at 20%. That just changed. They also are limited, so that has to increase over time. And we're not at 10% for for the university system. Right now, the highest fee is $6.76 a credit hour, and it can increase, if it increases up to 10% of tuition, that would be somewhere around just shy of $11, assuming knowing, based on today's current base tuition. So no, we're not at 10% today. We have some room, for potential increases, again, subject to trustee approval, student fee, committee approval, and board approval.
Bill, you had a comment.
No, I just wanted to get down to a little bit of detail. First, I'm not convinced that the PICO problem is temporary. I think it may be permanent.
Oh, yeah.
For a second, let's assume that it's temporary and a few years from now, PICO levels come back up. If we use some of our tuition authority to get into debt, typically we'll have a 10-year call feature on the bonds. Might we be able then, in the future, if PICO comes back, to be able to use a PICO allocation to take out a bond issue that was supported by the student tuition?
I
It
think-
would seem like a minor thing that we could work into
You're talking
that might
tuition?
help us later.
Not CIT.
I wish we had one of our, I know some advisors are participating via phone. I wish Craig was here. I would think, I am not a bond attorney, I would think there'd be a way to craft the PICO resolution, because PICO is usually mostly bond funded, that could be crafted so that the bond proceeds could be used to, take out the bonds, somehow do a refunding or something like that. I would think that could be done, but I don't absolutely know. That's really a legal question of could it be done,
I think it just might give us some flexibility 10 years from now. If life has changed and there is some money from the state for some of these buildings, then we could relieve the pressure on the tuition if we were able to refund those bonds by using some of a future
Yeah.
PICO allocation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I know it's sometimes some other states have things that are similar to that, where the university issues the debt, and then in good times, the state will step in and take out the debt. And whether it's via refunding or some kind of defeasance, it's a great concept.
But are we talking tuition or CITF?
I
You're
was talking tuition.
You're talking tuition.
Right.
Just want to be sure I'm following.
Uh-huh. All right, so now we've got let's see, one, redirect revenues, non-tobacco settlement, corporate income tax, capital improvement fee.
President Benz?
Yes.
May I make a
Oh,
comment?
of course,
Although-
Matt, sorry, I couldn't see it.
The capital improvement fee, although I think it may be the most politically feasible to get done,
Yes, I do too.
it doesn't necessarily give us the flexibility as a system that we really want. I know in your case, President Benz, you need a lot of capital improvement. You're growing in leaps and bounds, where the University of Florida may not have all the capital needs that you need. We need operating money. We need to hire more faculty. So I would just hate to put capital fee as an increase in a building fee or a capital improvement trust fund fee ahead of the next things where it gives us more flexibility on issuing bonds.
I don't know as we'll have to choose, but if we do, we certainly can decide on where it goes in terms of our priority list. Right. Yeah, I see your point. Any other discussion on these points? Janice?
Janet, did you want to speak to the non-tobacco settlement or the corporate income tax as to whether or not those should be immediate or those should be longer term?
I don't have
Okay. Debbie, from a politically feasible standpoint?
You mean because we've tried that cigarette tax so many times? Stuff like that? Is that what you mean?
I'm just saying short term versus longer term. That's why I'm asking.
I think I'm like Janet in that I'm a little bit neutral on it, and I'll tell you why. There's nothing wrong with throwing it out to seeing how far you can get this session. It's how many chits you'd be willing to spend on it. Is that where you are, Janet?
Yeah, I mean, we've chased that windmill before.
Yeah,
so.
and I don't mind chasing it again. I think it's a good idea, because it's like the CITF. Remember, we finally got it passed. How many years did it take us? 4 years.
Yeah.
And, we're delighted that the community colleges went up to 20% because that gave us more latitude. But we kept throwing it out, and we didn't waste any chits on throwing it out in
Right.
past years. So I'm willing to do that.
So
But
this
I
is
see
sort of
what
a
you're saying,
medium one?
Janice.
If you had
Do
a high, medium, and low, this is medium?
Right, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
great to put out ideas, I think they respect that, but then you
Right.
just don't,
Yeah, we're not going to waste a whole
Well,
bunch of
I'm
chits
just trying
on
to
it.
get, to Chairman Beard's point
right.
about
Not too many.
not putting so many things
Yeah.
out there. And so if there's a.
Why don't you put it on page 2, and then
Okay,
we'll come back.
okay,
and
that's
do
what
it.
I'm asking.
Yeah.
And if anyone has any heartburn,
Right.
we need to know that, so,
All right.
okay.
What about the first one, the tax shift one? Is that more of a medium, or is that more of
It's the
a
same,
immediate?
Jason.
Yeah.
All
Where are
right, so
you?
that's a medium.
Where are you?
The
The
redirect the
redirect.
tax shift to try to fix PICO?
Well, you know, right now, there's a task force that some of us are supposed to be following, but apparently I'm not doing such a hot job, on communications tax and revenue and stuff. I mean, there's other stuff going on in the state. It will be revenue shifts. I would leave that on there. I would leave
Okay.
that in there. We have benefited in the past from the communication services tax, that neutral, so I'd leave it there.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be my recommendation. I don't know about the rest of you.
Is capital improvement fee right now high?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's high. Good. We got 1 high and 3 mediums. And that includes both bullets under capital improvement fee.
Medium high.
All right, yeah, medium high.
Well, just because you have it doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because you have it doesn't mean you have to do
Right,
it.
right, but we're ranking them.
And I agree with Debbie, if I may, just that, I think we should leave the revenue redirect as a medium high. I initially thought not as well, but I think she's right. It seems like there's a likelihood some legislation will be introduced.
We're getting
We
there.
may not be the sponsor, but
But that's okay.
we want to
pile
have.
on.
It helps if we have it on a high, medium to high, so we say, yeah, it's on our radar, not just, on the way back. You know, we have benefit, it was just 2 years ago, we benefited tremendously from that, so, yeah, okay.
Okay, now we got some good hot topics coming up. I know we need a little break, so why don't we take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 11:15, okay? All right. Chris, why don't you proceed with the university debt issue?
Okay. Under university debt, we're back to the regular format where each bullet does represent a specific recommendation. So under 101062, we have the concept of allowing up to 5% of base tuition to be used for debt service. To increase or eliminate the 5% restriction on the use of the student activity and athletics fee. Those are both allowed, but only up to 5%. So that would either say, take off the cap, the other fees aren't capped at all, or increase that cap. Eliminate the functional relationship requirement. Allow the revenue streams to be pledged as a basket of revenues to create an obligation or pledge of all available named revenues, so that you still would have to pledge specific revenues, but you can combine a basket of revenues. Right now, and that sort of is very similar to eliminating the functional relationship test. So you could argue both those bullets are, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And the last one is very much similar but a little bit different. Remove the silo concept. If you have something like housing that's actually generating revenues, you could use it to subsidize a project. Say you had a parking garage that, for whatever reason, it wasn't, fiscally self-sufficient, say at least in the early years. If you had one project that was, had excess revenues, it could subsidize another project. So you could operate them together without having to prove there was some relationship as we do now. Like, say, housing parking would be a good example. Now, if you do housing and parking, and you do it sort of together as a joint pledge, you have to literally show that, that parking garage will service that dorm, or dorms in general. If the parking is just kind of general parking, forget it, because parking, that would be bad. That's how the perception of 101062 sees it. And it goes way back, and we've had this discussion before, way back, the state was very hesitant to even allow any debt. And after long deliberations, allow the universities to do housing bonds. But there was still a real concern that, bad projects would somehow be subsidized. And so you didn't want the good projects, enabling bad projects. But literally, it's now at the point where we say, well, parking, you can't do parking from housing unless it's purely, it's either directly related or they got to be kept pure. And in today's world, it doesn't seem to make as much sense as maybe it did years ago when we were just very cautious to even do any bonding. The state of Florida was reluctant to even get into the bond, issues at all, years ago. So that's that bullet. The other isn't, the next section, the debt guideline change.
Chris, can I
Yes.
interrupt? And I don't know if this is the right place for it, since we're talking about fees, but the one thing we'd like, I don't know how specific we want to be, but the one thing we'd like to see is something about tech fees, that we could use those revenues. In our specific, we'd like to build a data center. And even when there is PICO, I don't know if they've ever funded a data center. So again, it goes back to the construction thing. We've got a 1970s building that we're trying to make a data center that just doesn't work anymore. So we'd like to be able to take some of those tech fees and bond that to build a building that directly, it supports everybody, students, faculty, staff. If you don't have a network, you don't have a university right now.
Right.
So when you're talking about fees, I don't know where the place to put it, but we would like to see some language about flexibility in the tech fees.
Good place for it. Let's add a
So
bullet.
let's add tech fees. We could probably also add, when I had this conversation with Matt and just have not gotten around to add it, we talked, there's some other revenues that were originally not in 10-1062, but there's been some statutory changes since there's some other fees. There's more flexibility, like under market-based tuition, and there's some other things that statutorily fees have been changed. There's some local fees, and none of those are currently allowed by 10-1062 because it was, they were all enacted after 10-1062.
Right.
So we probably need to go back and revisit all the fees, including the tech fee that right now are ruled out of 10-1062, and see if we can put them back in and what that would look like. And I think that's sort of a drafting question. Debbie?
Because of concern about having way too much stuff.
Debbie, they
in the
need you to
report-
speak into the microphone because.
Because of the concern about having way too many items in the report and making it too broad to where it's overwhelming. I think Matt's point and others made, I think we ought to combine a bunch of this stuff as one issue under 10-1062, bring in all those fees as one issue. If in fact the legislature might choose to, pick some off or cherry pick, we'll deal with that. But I think we should combine it as a singular issue to go forth with, as opposed to doing, it might appear as separate bullets in our report, President Bentz, but as a single issue to go forth to the legislature with. So then, we'll negotiate on the elements within that.
Right.
I don't know how Janice and Janet feel about that to go forth, but I think it's easier to go forth like that.
We agree with Debbie. We know what happens if we don't.
All right.
That is.
So would there be any appetite to get rid of all fees and allow them to be rolled into tuition to give us ultimate
No.
You are
flexibility?
outside the box now.
Because if you want flexibility, and you could put structure around the,
I think
Debt
you need to
service
be
ratios.
really, really careful on that. I would not, certainly for the short term, I will tell you right now that I would not recommend that for the short term.
So what would be the shortened version of this series of changes to 10-1062? Would it be like expand flexibility? Would it be, what would it be? What would capture what we're aiming at?
Well, my point is you might have 5 or 6 unique issues within it, but you go forth with it as one change to 10-1062.
Okay.
For example, including specific additional fees that are capable
Right.
of being bonded, dealing with the 5% cap on those that are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would even suggest that the 3
So-
bullets under the last 3 are all pretty much the same bullet,
Mm-hmm.
even in your bulleting format. But I mean, the summary could just be revised 10-1062 to allow more flexibility.
Well,
And then-
and for purposes of the report,
Right.
we could, you know,
Yeah.
do a little
Right, even in
delineation.
the report, right, you
Okay.
could combine those 3 bullets, Chris, down on the bottom 3, they seem all,
I think we could combine this all, and I think then the wordsmithing will be coming, flexibility was the buzzword of last session. We need to say, okay, it's about taking some limits off. It's about, it's still keeping within those bounds, but sort of making the box a little bigger. And it's like, what's the appropriate, how do we frame that? And I'm not the wordsmith, but I know I'll be ably assisted on making sure this is, it's accurately said, because this is how revised 101062, that's boring. How do we make it, where it sounds good?
Right.
It's
Matt.
understandable.
Yeah, and I think John Carlson mentioned it earlier that, the legislature asks us to be more entrepreneurial and more business-like all the time, and then they put the walls between how we can use these colors of money, how you can, I think it should play well to give us the flexibility to be more entrepreneurial, and we do have the Board of Governors oversight, making sure we're not out in the wild, wild west.
Right, and it also is in the deregulation theme of allowing us to do more with the money we do have, that this is, in times of plenty, that was a whole different world. Now we need to manage our money a little tighter. And good. So we're going to keep all these bullets, all the things in these bullets. We're going to make a little summary, and we're going to kind of combine 3, 4, and 5. And our legislative gurus, Janet, Debbie, and Janice are going to put it in the right kind of language and form so that
May-
they can run it.
May I ask one question?
Of course.
Because you knew I would.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
You're doing fine. You're helpful.
The very first bullet under
Yeah.
1010.62, allow up to 5% of base tuition to be used for debt service. You don't want that cap changed, do you?
Yes. Yes.
It can't be used at all.
Right now, it's 0.
It's 0.
Yeah, I know it's
Yeah,
0.
right now it's 0, and this is just saying allow up to 5%.
And you want that?
Yes.
At least.
Oh, you think that's not feasible at all?
The cap is now, isn't the cap 5% now?
No, that's
No,
on fees.
That's on fees. There's
That's
no.
on
cap.
tuition is
Non
0.
tuition
Can't use it.
Can't bond tuition.
Oh, on tuition, I thought we were talking about
Right.
that, sorry.
And here's my concern, and you tell me if I'm wrong. We've had tremendous reductions in our budget. Right now, tomorrow, we're proposing, this is in the short term, President Benz, a budget that will, a trade-off on the differential in order for the GR appropriation, which really won't even bring us to where we were, I believe, in 2007-8. I guess my concern is if somebody does in fact, and I don't mean to tell anybody what to do, bond tuition, I don't want to ever be in a position where the legislature, because, I mean, as you know, I've done budgets on the other side of the street, and if I had recommended 10 million, for example, for STEM, and then cut you 20 million the next year, I always told you, well, I didn't cut STEM. You still have to do what we took, and I just don't want us to be in that position. That's why I'm worried about the short term right now with the fiscal state and bonding tuition. I understand you want to get it in legislation so we have flexibility when it's appropriate. I just don't know what the timing is. I just bring that up as an issue.
Mark?
I think we ought to have a robust discussion on this recommendation related to the 5% base tuition, because I can see some very sharp pros and some very sharp
too.
cons. And let me just sketch for you what I see as a very sharp con. Once we do this, any return to PICO is over. And we will continue to shift, given the secular trends and the relationship between state support and the burden on students. We will continue to shift the burden onto students and to reduce the burden from the state, if you will, to underwrite public education. So, Madam Chair, I think we ought to have a very robust discussion about this and the pros and cons, because I think once this barn door is open, it's over forever as it relates to going back to some kind of a more dedicated revenue source for our building funds. And I've been, militant about trying to find some solutions to this, but given the overall trends, I worry that you really do close the door once we let this start happening. And part of that is because what I would see happening is, there isn't anything necessarily perverse about this, but I would see other interests beginning then to drive our budget even more directly than they are, as a means by which to, facilitate construction. Because the revenue, it's possible to be there.
I get your point.
But my only concern as we continue to walk through this, though, is and I'm not trying to be facetious, I thought one of the points of this task force was to re-engineer the way we do business now.
It is.
And to re-engineer the way we do, I don't want to get caught in a trap of trying to deliver a new process under an old paradigm. If we're going to deliver a new process, it needs to be under a new paradigm, and some of those have to be paradigm shifts. So I'm worried about trying to do new things the same old way, and that's not re-engineering. That's just retabbing. So if we're really going to re-engineer, not that this specific issue is right or wrong the way it sits, I think, nothing comes off the table, and we just have to nudge through it. Because I thought the last meeting, there was a very strong voice on being able to pledge tuition as just another tool in the toolbox. Understanding that there may be a negative outcome and that second order effect of getting that flexibility. You asked for it, you got it. But I'm not so sure that doesn't stifle creativity if it comes off the table.
Yes, please.
John, yes, and I think that's really well put, although we've identified some other options that weren't on the table at the last meeting that may be viable and that may have, that would constitute some significant paradigm shift. I mean, the color of money, if we can address that issue, becomes very important. The capital improvement trust fund dynamics, if we can change that, I think can be material to shifting the paradigm, giving us greater freedom overall, is very attractive. Part of the challenge here is that we're a little wobbly on what we want to accomplish and what the order of magnitude of that is. So, what's the gap? What is it that we know we need to do with facilities over the next 10 to 12, 20 years? What's the total cost of that? How are we going to, find the revenue? Where's the revenue going to come from to deal with that? I mean, we don't know. It's almost any port in the storm as long as we make a change. I would be more comfortable if we had a sense of that. And that goes to Chris's, Chris figures we need $250 million. But is that really what we need to accomplish the board's objectives and our institutional objectives? So do we know? I don't know that we know, so therefore we don't know what we're trying to plug here.
Well, we do know what happened in the past. I mean, what we had in the past.
Yes.
And it's 250 to 300 million a year. So, I mean, why would it be less than that going forward? I mean,
With more students, right.
And I think most of us know what our deferred maintenance is versus our routine maintenance versus our vision over the next 5 years of other capital projects. Now, whether anybody believes that formula or not is a different discussion, but I mean, I know personally I've got $75 million worth of deferred maintenance right now waiting to be done. And that doesn't take care of improvements. That's just making sure I can fix roofs, pave roads, paint classrooms. That's just deferred, replace chillers. I know I've got that on the books now at $75 million. And I bet everybody has a number about what that is. And then everybody has a number about what they would like to do and what, if there's an ROI. And I think that's, again, I'm going to keep using that acronym. I think that's important to be able to demonstrate fiscal responsibility, that there's an ROI on this, whether that's output of production of students' degrees, research, or dollars. I think we all have could probably produce that number. And it's going to be a big number.
Are we still doing short-term, mid-term, and long-term? Okay. Just want to be sure.
Larry?
Yeah, I was just curious because I want to go back to Chris's 2012, 13, 14, $250 million. And since some of these are quantitative in nature, has there been any thought given to what fraction of that would come from these various sources if they were implemented in that window? That's the question I have.
I think that's your point, and also, may I?
Mark's.
You need to speak in the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I got in trouble during the break.
Okay, I'll be better about it. I think the point I think you're both maybe driving at is, yeah, I've quantified, and it could be argued, oh, is it 250, is it 300, what it should be. These other items, the tech fee, the 5% on student activity and athletics fees, those are relatively minor. I mean, we're talking, just to give you an order of magnitude, say the tech fee was bondable. At USF, I know it's not in the package, but that would allow them to build maybe a $10 million facility. So it's not enormous. That gives you an order of magnitude. These other fees, the same way. The 5% of base tuition, that was a recommendation, but it hasn't been quantified. We don't know, to your point, we don't know whether, could we meet all the needs with 1%, 2%, 3%, maybe it's 6%. That 5% was more of a, let's talk about it. Perhaps that's more of a medium-range goal, because we haven't really quantified the deferred maintenance. We know it's enormous, but we don't know how enormous it is. 5%, we might fight very hard and get it, and then turn out, it really should have been 10% or 20, yeah.
Bill?
I just want to add another perspective or thought on the 5%. Given the cuts that we've all taken, I wouldn't be comfortable right now bonding and having debt service up to 5% of the tuition that I have.
I agree.
However,
You say you would or you
I
wouldn't?
would
No, you
not.
would not.
I would not. However, what I would like to have that 5% flexibility for is on the debt that we're currently issuing. We've already talked about adding to that debt by the concurrency fees that we're going to have to pay. By being able to use that 5% base tuition as part of a support agreement to support existing debt would lower my lower my debt costs on other debt. So it could really be helpful even if I'm not using it for actual debt service.
But using it to back up and
As a
pledge
backup, and so that then when we're getting the debt rated, it would have a bearing on the rating, and therefore the amount of interest we'd have to pay on the debt that we're issuing. So it could be very useful from that standpoint.
Other than a packaging standpoint, I mean, I would get rid of any numbers tied to anything and leave it more generic, and then get into the debate on how things are crafted. But if it allow base tuition to be used for an increase or eliminate restrictions on these, I don't know if I'd get so quantifiable on 5%, 10%, 15%. I think, again, what we went back to was the key was flexibility. So I don't know how much, I don't want to keep beating the horse to death. I don't think we know how much flexibility we need because we don't have a number. We just know we need flexibility.
So
if we,
maybe it should be midterm or long-term, not short-term, because we
Maybe.
really don't know where we are. In other words, not this year.
Yeah,
Right.
John, I agree with you, except I think there's going to be reluctance to do anything at all, and I think the 5% is just a way of giving a comfort level to the folks that might support
Let them
this
know
to
we're
say
thinking
that
a
it
low
won't,
number.
it
Well,
won't it won't get out of control. If we didn't put a number on it, they might not do anything for
But
us.
and get mad.
well, I would hope that's where the debate would come, where instead of us, that may be the number that it gets landed on, but it may be 7%, it may be 3%, but to put 5, then it's probably going to be somewhere in that range. And right, maybe 10 is the number, and we don't, or 20, but we put 5.
I just think if we don't limit it in some way, we might not even be able to have the conversation about it.
Can't pay faculty.
Right. Governor Beard, what do you think?
Well, my sense is that we ought to have it on the table. Tuition ultimately around around the states is being bonded for facilities, and probably some states use it only for, But I think it ought to be on the table along with all this other stuff. I don't know what the number is. I mean, we don't even know what the risks are. They're probably different for every university as to what kind of coverage they'll have when they start looking at expenses and bonding and how much capacity they have. So, but it sure ought to be on the table, if for no other reason than to
get the conversation started.
Yeah, get the
And let 'em know
conversation
that
started,
that's, you know,
yeah. I mean,
we're not alone.
if it's not flexibility, it's tuition.
Could I trouble you, Governor Colson, with your opinion on this issue? Okay, thank you, thank you.
I
We'll
think,
keep
I
it
think
on
the 5% also is good because right now there's a 5% cap on the fees. It's a number that they've seen, they're comfortable
Yeah,
with,
that's
so it's
true,
carrying that
Scott.
concept over to a different source.
But being on the table doesn't mean that we give up our priorities for the other issues. That's why I asked you the issue vis-à-vis short-term, midterm, long-term. Because I'm very concerned about the board not asking for a tuition increase, saying that they don't want to do that, asking for the GR, and then us turning around and offering the tuition for, I mean, I think timing is a very big issue, to me, on this issue.
When we start to set the priorities, either short-term, midterm, you know, maybe that magnitude question that Chris says is, you know, obtuse in some of these needs to be at least defined. So the priorities, because I think, you know, the point is, we are, you know, I mean, the governor described it as a crisis, and being a facilities guy who, you know,
Yeah.
oversees the university, I think most of us are running at a residual PICO that we're running the universities on. We've had almost exclusive dependency on that for our infrastructure, and it's not the deferred maintenance, it's next year, what now will get deferred. I just deferred a purchase order the other day. I said it was a $40,000 fix. Normally, I would have said, let's do it, but I deferred it. So I imagine most of us are starting to get in that position. It's the capital renewal that's next year, the year beyond, that you're supposed to be doing, that we're going to not be able to do. And now, those capital renewal projects are going to be termed deferred maintenance, but they're really systems that are beyond, you know, repair. There are systems like roofs and life safety systems that are going to be critical to the, you know, I was talking to Chris earlier about the DOE building and how, you know, they had some elevators drop, you know, considerably before they said, well, let's address those elevators. So I just think, you know,
17
keeping all the options we have, and tuition just seems like a given. It's like taxes, that's going to be there. So that is a source. You know, once you get this approved, you have a source.
So what I'm hearing is, bullets 3 through 5 are high. We want flexibility, be able to mix our funds, and on the eliminate, on the second bullet, restriction of use of student activities fees for debt purposes, is that a high, medium, or low?
It's high.
High.
I think
It's
it's
high.
high too. Anybody
High.
else want to lower it?
I think it's high.
And on base tuition, keep it medium, so it's warm, the heart is beating, we start the conversation. Anybody got any problems with any of that? Yes?
Okay, the only thing that I did thinking this through is that it strikes me, and I think Chris was starting to do it. If we could say that during the last, since we haven't had any significant PICO in the last, 4 years, we could say we have $1 billion backlog
Yeah.
in the proposed approved construction. And in order to get that moving, that we would put together a package of initiatives that would enable us to get that going. That would include, you know, some tuition, CITF expansion, cross subsidization based upon excess revenues. I think that, to me, would make sense, because it's very quantifiable, it's finite, it shows an ROI, it's a major initiative, and it's kind of locked around the initiatives that we know we should have been taking, that we hadn't, that were largely approved and ready to go. That might give a comfort level that this is not going to be an in perpetuity, out of control, open, vain commitment to needed facilities. So anyway, I don't think that falls necessarily within the mandate right now.
Right, right.
But I think it's something, Dick, so then, you know, we go into the legislative session proposing $1 billion, and here's how we're going to help to fund it, and it's based upon prior approved initiatives that are waiting, that you know, are going nowhere unless we can find funding for it. So the universities step in, shared responsibility, and we've essentially identified the funding. So then it's something concrete, we can get our arms around it and move forward. That I think could be very exciting for a lot of us and worth the risk of the 5% or the 3% or whatever that would be. But we don't have that. You know, it's kind of any port in the storm right now, and that's what worries me about this overall.
that's a good way to sell it, is what I guess you're saying.
Yeah, this is what you get, this is the
Right.
jobs that would be created, this is the ROI,
Immediately,
this is
and
how it
here's what
fits
we
into the
need to do
master
it.
plan.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
All right. Now, we need to move on. Let's go to our SUS debt guideline change, Chris.
I think I can take this very quickly. Some ideas that were suggested actually were changes that were within the board's authority, there's no legislation, it just is a debt guideline change. So perhaps what I would suggest is, see what we're able to achieve this session, and then if we achieve some changes, we'll have to revise the guidelines anyway to match law, and then we can incorporate those. Maybe this could sort of be a summer project. I think trying to change the guidelines, last time it took us 6 to 9 months to do that anyway. So that would be my recommendation to the task force, that we
Next
take these
summer.
to next summer.
Right,
Not this
right,
summer,
right.
September. I got 2 weeks till summer's
Right,
over.
right.
A week? No, a summer project. Some of these will depend very much on what happens, like the function relations test.
Of course.
Test. If it's eliminated statutorily,
Right.
we just take it out of the guidelines. If it's not changed statutorily, perhaps we can improve the language in the guidelines. So that would be my recommendation.
So this is L for low, or in terms of priority right now, but it'll come next.
And then
Now,
P3s.
P3s.
P3s, we have 3 bullets, I think, again, very closely interconnected. One, broaden the view of P3s to include classroom and other non-housing buildings, the academic buildings, via some type of long-term lease arrangement. We talk about the language that was introduced late in session, or at least circulated, because there was never a bill filed, that would have allowed some limited leaseback type arrangements, I believe. And this is the same thing. Allow, long-term leases, either as COPs or as lease revenue bonds. I think they're all one and the same. I know just because of the work of the task force, there's a lot of interest. There was a lot of interest last session. I've heard from a lot of other parties outside the system, we want to do P3s. How can we help you do P3s? I think undoubtedly every session P3 legislation is introduced anyway, but, it's never really been to our benefit. So with all that said, clearly the sense of this group has been to do something. And the question is what, or do we just, is it more generic and we work with the, on the actual devil in the details drafting and come back? But that's really what's up for debate. How prescriptive do we want to be today, or do we just say generically, yes, we want to do something, and we'll see what the language looks like.
Exactly.
Well, what's the pleasure of this task force? Matt?
I like the idea of keeping it generic, because the P3 scenario would fit the changes we're looking to make for the bonds and debt. If we can eliminate the color of money and the silos and utilize all existing revenue, no matter where it's coming from, to bond, and at the same time, if we can use that for long-term leases with a private developer, then it gives us the ability to have 2 different tools. Do it ourselves, or do it with the help of private capital. But it's having the ability to pay back that debt or that lease, utilizing the multiple revenue streams that will make the difference for us.
Matt?
This is Tony Bissett. I agree 100% with Matt. I mean, the P3, I mean, if you wanted to, I think, Chris, you said it every year, there's, procurement language that goes through session to try to make it easier to procure P3s. I don't think that's as much of an issue. The issue here is how you can't even have the P3 conversation, because it'd be impossible under the current 10.1062 guidelines to even pay back any P3 project. So I agree with Matt. Keep it general and focus on getting down to the details of what we think we can get 10.10 amended to.
Yeah, and I'm fully supportive of P3s. They work well for the direct revenues, dormitories, parking. The classrooms come back to, what revenue source are you going to use to pay for them? And I just want to make sure, we get the changes to 10-10-62 so that we have a choice between whether we want to build it and bond it ourselves or do a P3, because
That's
some
right.
places
Right.
P3 makes sense, some places it doesn't.
Right,
So I'd hate to force us to P3s.
absolutely. I think
When it
it's
doesn't
another
make the most
tool in the
sense.
toolbox, as people say these days, and what right now we can't do is utilize P3s for PICO projects, academic classrooms and laboratories and things like that. And we're thinking, or would like to build a multi-functional building of which several floors would be academic. Well, right now, we can't do that with P3. Right, with P3. We'd have to do something else. So this will give us more flexibility. Some folks might want to use both tools to build one facility. Okay, general language, see what we can get in revision to 10-10-62, and I think we're strong on that. Any other comments on the P3s? Good. All right. Yes, Clint?
Thank you. I think the key thing here is that 10-10-62 is really, the changes to 10-10-62 is really the enabler for P3s,
Right, that's what I was going to say.
That's right.
which raises the priority of the 10-10-62.
I think that's going right to the top. Must try to get done.
If you had to get down to 5, your top 1 or 2,
Yes,
there you go.
that's right. I agree. Anybody else? I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And it's also embedded, it's also related to the flexibility of our getting rid of the silos and expand, and the functionality test and all that. That's kind of one nice package that we can all sell. And it makes sense, it's logical.
Judy, do you want to specifically speak to long-term leases, though? Because it's such an inherent part of all that in the 10-10-62. Just put the language in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because that's not a bond, it's a lease from a private company.
Right.
Right.
Or a not private company.
Or not,
And just to add one thing about the leases, because of, not to revisit it, but the whole tuition thing, I think it's a touchy subject whenever you start talking about that, whether it's with Ben or the legislators. And sometimes of not using the term bonding and using other debt mechanisms like a lease, we can get a little bit further. And so I think including both is going to be critical.
I agree. All right, good. Good. P3s were easy. We've discussed them a lot. We've thought about them a lot. We can pick up the momentum from last year. I think that's just a no-brainer for this task force to recommend to our esteemed Board of Governors. All right. Let's go to the last charge, which are specific university projects.
Okay, and hopefully we can move forward with these quickly as well. First, let me talk about the budgetary flexibility. Where we're at with this is, I think in general terms, these 3 bullets that are under budgetary flexibility, these are all things that I think by and large the board could accomplish by better definition and regulation. And what I'm talking about is, for example, carry forward. It's murky right now as to what extent carry forward balances, to the extent there's any left, can be used for renovation of existing facilities. We've operated for many years under the old state agency framework. So we said, okay, if it's an expense, and it's for an E&G facility, you can use carry forward. So if you need to do, patching, painting, minor repair, under state agency, that's an expense. And it's an expense category. Universities have lump sum authority to do any authorized category. And that's how universities have generally, by and large, operated. But now, with the absence of PICO, universities are starting to say, well, what about the larger projects? What if I have a chiller go out? What if I have something significant can go out? Can I use my carry forward? Could I even use my E&G if I had to? Not that it would be the first choice, but what if you had no choice? And right now, board regulations are somewhat murky. It's real clear that you can't use E&G or carry forward to build a brand-new building. And I don't think anyone is really proposing that. But we have heard, I get every day a question, and I think it goes to Tom's point, the old PICO balances, the residual balances are drying up. And universities want to follow the rules and say, what is the rule? And I say, well, it's kind of a gray area. I think we need to define it. We need to allow the universities to allow them to use their carry forward balances to continue to operate the campus and not feel they're going to get an audit ding for using E&G funds to fix a chiller or to repair a roof or to do, stuff that just absolutely has to be done. So I think these set of regulations, these recommendations could be combined. It's not a statutory change. I think this isn't a summer project. This should probably stay in the report under the rubric of, things the board could do to help
So this
the
is a
universities.
recommendation to our Board of Governors.
This is a recommendation
Right.
to the board. The only part of it I'd say is statutory is, right now statutes, there's different statutes, and some say there's $1 million limit, some say there's a $2 million limit, and they're contradictory.
Right.
So it would be great if we could get that cleaned up somewhere along the way. We keep thinking there'll be a glitch bill to fix that, to make it all $2 million. And it hasn't happened yet, but maybe this year, amongst everything else, we can make it clear that there just should be statutory consistency. You shouldn't be able to look one place and say, oh, it's $1 million, and look somewhere else in the same chapter and say it's $2 million.
Right.
But
Well, can I
that's
ask a
just,
question?
yes, Debbie.
What is the legal interpretation of that? I mean, in other words, have the attorneys looked at that to see if in fact it really is $2 million? The inconsistency, can we tap the $2 million instead of the $1 million is my question. I know you're saying that it's written two different ways in statute. That's true all over the place. Can we hang our hat on the $2 million right now the way it's written is all I'm asking.
I don't
that's- we
know.
might
I've heard
need-
different ways. I've heard, well, the $2 million was enacted after the $1 million, so the $2 million trumps the $1 million. But I think you're out, from a common sense standpoint, if somebody doesn't, as a non-lawyer, I don't like that. I'd like it to be clearer.
Okay,
And the truth is, I remember when the accident happened, the
do I.
bill, it was too late, and they refused to fix it, so we know it needs to be fixed.
But it
Staff
also
knows.
begs the question as to whether or not this is the time we would try to get it raised in the name of eliminating paperwork and bureaucracy, and get it raised to 5 million, or a number that would make it, still at the.
Reasonable for this
more
day and
locally
age.
managed, eliminating bureaucracy. And that may be something that we should do,
Right.
which is consistent with the whole efficiency mantra.
I would agree and say, why put any limit on it? That should be up to the universities to see if they have enough and carry forward for their deferred maintenance backlog and minor maintenance. I wouldn't even put a limit on it.
We can certainly start there as we draft the language, start there and see what, kind of response we get.
Well, we do have the hammer of no PICO money, and deferred maintenance is getting to a critical stage. Let the universities use their carry forward on it, instead of take it as a dang budget reduction in operating expenses. Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Is that subject near and dear? If I may move to the next.
Can I just ask for one other
yes.
clarification, too? I think the other thing that we had heard previously was whether or not the cap was per project or if it was in total. If you could only spend $2 million, or if it was $2 million per project. That was the other thing that I thought there was a little bit of murkiness about, too.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think it's two pieces to that.
Well, if it's
whether or
two-
not, yeah.
Well, if it's $2 million per minor project. and
Yeah,
you
but
can
it's
have-
not clear, the stat.
I
don't
know.
think the stat, that's what I'm saying. So I think
What
there's.
we're recommending to the board is that they seek clarification.
We
No.
draft.
We draft language that we would
Exactly
like
what we
to
want.
see them move
Yeah,
forward.
we
Okay,
do
got
want
it, got it.
Right, so
Got it.
to just to expand a little bit what we're talking about, this seems so in the weeds, but we're really at that point of in the weeds. Let's take roofing. If we say that we have identified 5 buildings that need to have roof replacements, if we say that's one project and it costs $5 million to do one 5-building roof replacement, well, we're over the minor project limit, and if you can't use, your carry forward on that. But if you rather say it's 5 buildings and 5 separate projects of $1 million each, oh, that's fine. Well, that's kind of silly, and I think the board needs to better define what you can and can't do and not make our procurement officials and facility managers kind of have to torture the process to do stuff that just seems to be common sense.
Right.
Yeah, and Chris, I would just address, I don't think it's unclear the minor project threshold is $2 million for our annual services agreements. You're talking about funding it from carry forward. Because right now, the limit, it was all a procurement issue, the $1 million initially. It was delegated from the board when they had full contracting authority to university presidents. That was the $1 million contracting authority. So what we do is we select annual service contracts, and we can award those without going through a procurement process, an advertisement. We just pick from that stable of architects and builders to design and build projects up to the $2 million limit. So that's in practice right now by all the universities embedded in our local contracts.
Right, and that's where the glitch came in. When the procurement limit was increased to $2 million, clearly that was increased to $2 million, but some of the old restrictive language, not really related to procurement, but to budget, color of money issues, was left at $1 million. Like Janet said, it happened too late. We were lucky, I was not lucky, we got the bill changed to allow the $2 million limit right at the very end of session, and we didn't have an opportunity to fix every statutory reference.
Chris, if we use the example that you just used, I think it supports the point that Matt made about just not, why do we have a limit in there?
I think maybe the activity, the deferred maintenance, for example, or maintenance.
Right.
What it can be used for, just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Like it can't be used to, I don't know, to
Build
build buildings, it has to be used to maintain buildings.
Right.
It has to be maintenance. You can't build a sidewalk, but you can repair a sidewalk.
And up until this point, I think the universities have learned to play the game, and that is putting different projects in different categories to stay under limits, and it's silly. It's a game you have to play, as opposed to, what your deferred maintenance is, what the priorities are on your campus. If we can lift the restrictions so that the universities can deal with their deferred maintenance backlog the way they need to do it, I think it would make us all operate much more efficiently.
I would think so.
And reduce our carry-forward balances in a productive way.
That's right, yeah.
So we're going to keep this. This is high right now. It's mostly to the Board of Governors, but may require some statutory language. Okay, good. H for high.
And now, if we may, I think we're on the very last
Yes,
bullet.
we are. It's only
Only
noon. Good.
Only noon. We've got 30 more minutes.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this very last one.
Oh, yeah, we got more.
This now goes into charge 5 and 6, and we deferred this. And this is where we asked the universities to give us examples of projects, specific projects that could be constructed, maintenance or new project, that, if we said, if we can only do one project, and you need an exception, somehow a statutory exception or exception to board guidelines, to do one very high-value project, what would it be? And the best example I received, I'll say, was University of South Florida. And the reason I'm going to single them out is I left their project off the list. So, go figure. Let me briefly, as best I can.
Oh, John.
John, do you want me to try to explain it, or would you like to briefly describe it?
You're on, Chris.
I'm on. So if I get it wrong, raise your hand. The first is a tech center. The University of South Florida makes a very good
Data
business
center.
Data center. What did I call it? Tech, data. Okay. Anyway, a new data center, it would cost $10 million. They would say we could bond a portion of the tech fee to construct the center. It seems logical, it seems rational, they make a good business case for a new data center. That's not allowed under 101062. When the tech fee was introduced, I think it was 2007, maybe it was 2008, 101062 had already been written, so the tech fee's not in it because it wasn't written. So it seems like that's well worth bringing back, and we talked about that already in 101062. The other example from USF is, again, on the carry forward. They said, they have chillers, they have other things, that if they could take out these inefficient chillers, they could use carry forward to replace the chillers, they need to be replaced, and the new chillers would be more energy efficient, so it would generate some savings. But right now, unless they torture, or kind of creatively interpret existing policy, they can't do it. They don't feel comfortable doing it. But if the board would, allow them to use carry forward to replace chillers, for example, it would have a high ROI. So those are the types of things that, we're looking for. Some may be statutory, some may just be the board saying, hey, that's okay to be an exception to the rule. And we're, all along we've been talking about general policy. Here we're talking about, we say, well, notwithstanding the general rule, whether it's good or bad, let's at least approve a specific project. And I think each university would have projects like that. I know we talked to President Bentz this morning and said, well, of course, we have a project very similar to that. It's not a data center, but it would be a mixed-use type facility for academics, laboratories, maybe some housing. It sounded great, but I can just see that as a functional relationship test nightmare. Whereas, we might say, even if we weren't successful in putting aside the functional relationship test, perhaps we might say, for this one project, let's set aside the functional relationship test. That would allow UF to build this mixed-use facility. I think each school would have a project like that. It just has to be, a list like that would have to be developed. What's on the following pages are a whole series of recommendations. I think many we've already covered that come from the different schools and say, here's how we could do projects like that. If you set aside these certain rules, we could do a lot of good things. No additional state money is required. It's really just a matter of making exceptions to existing rules. And I think we've covered a lot of it already, but I think this is open for discussion at this point.
I was just going to speak back to what Debbie said originally about perceptions. And this particular topic, I think, would really help in giving the universities or having them purchase a lot of goodwill with folks that are watching how we handle these flexibilities. And if we did it one project at a time, I think it would help folks have a better comfort level with us, that it's not going to be the wild, wild west if they gave us too much flexibility. And I do think to some extent that's what the universities have to do, is they have to purchase a little bit of goodwill with their actions, just based on some of the things that we've heard from other folks.
Mark.
I like the idea. I think it's consistent with the spirit of the conversation and the mandate that we have from the board. There are two pieces to that. Chris, some of us have buildings that we're not able to build because we don't have all the full funding.
Right.
So for instance, if we could find a way to bring in $8 or $10 million to that package, we could get the building built.
Right.
So that would be one point. And second of all, I would favor it trying to avoid, if you will, the statutory route and trying to give as much opportunity to the board as possible to give us the authority. And it could be on a case-by-case basis. It would increase paperwork for staff. But I mean, I think that's a way, also consistent with what Janice is suggesting, that the board should grapple with this and then find a way to move it forward. And part of that also is related to the board's authority. The board's authority is a function of the board, how much authority the board over time can legitimately exercise in a way that's consistent with ROI, efficiency, and accountability. This is a great example of an opportunity to do that.
Good. Okay. Now, we have a couple of other ideas that have been proposed and for consideration, and I'd like to thank Clint Glass for your efforts, and I'd like to, now that we do have time, to go over your thoughts as that are included in the package that we all have.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. really if you're referring to the page full of numbers and columns and lines and spaces,
That's one.
it's a simple model of sources and uses, but a lot of what we talked about today are embedded in this model. Where on the source side, there was basically three thoughts. One was the existing utility tax would continue and ultimately retire the accrued debt that the state has accumulated on behalf of the state university system. And I've heard that it won't be until 2031 until that magic day arrives, which is about 20 years from now. And the other idea is that what we talked about earlier is either a capital improvement fee, student charge fee. As I heard, there was currently $6 per credit hour now, and raising that to a number that makes more sense. I think if my math is right, if you get up to around $10 per credit hour, that works out to about $1 a day. And I got to tell you, when I walked into this campus for the first time, I thought this is a beautiful campus, and I wouldn't have a problem shelling out 4 quarters for that day to enjoy everything that this campus offers me as a student to get that 120-degree hour education and degree. The other thought, it was also tabled earlier today about either a corporate income tax deduction and or redirection of
Right.
revenues, and using those two in combination to create ultimately a sustainable model. And the one thought process is, the construction companies and maintenance companies and other vendors and suppliers that the universities employ focus on their income tax, their corporate income tax, to put back into the system. So you have this. You do have a functional relationship. You got one hand helping the other hand. On the use side, if you were just to look at one column, I think 2018, you see where total sources are about $260 million. We've heard that number earlier today, that we need about $250 million every single year. And the real important thing, this is sort of the first time you're tying all these different elements together. And I put them in 3 categories. One category is to maintain the existing facility. When you build a facility and you have an expectation that facility is going to last for 50 years, so many dollars every year have to be put in that facility. So when the chiller does go out, and it will go out in year 12, you've accrued monies and to take care of that problem and not have that problem become a bigger problem. Deferred maintenance goes away and that type of thing. The second element is replacement of existing assets. Ultimately, once that 50-year life has come and gone, to get the average age of the entire university asset systems down to something that's comfortable, currently I believe it's 28, and if you put no money into maintenance, that becomes 29 next year, it becomes 30 the next year, and so on and so forth. So there needs to be a forced retirement, if you will, of university assets to replace it. We heard earlier that maybe classroom buildings are too small. Maybe we need larger classroom buildings. Well, I'm sure everybody on their campus has a classroom building that's somewhere around 40 or 50 years old. Maybe it's time to raise that building and build a larger classroom building that has larger classrooms. That's the kind of thing that needs to go in. And when you look at it, a lot of that $250 million would go into that type of replacement. Finally, you've got the growth. If you're going to add 5,000 FTEs every single year, it's not a solution to add another period to the schedule and add another period to the schedule and have these universities open 18 hours a day. You have to have additional space for that additional FTE growth. So this is, again, a simple model, and I appreciate Chris's assistance. He put up with a lot of my questions, and he also was a great asset in helping me try to get these things in some sort of balanced form. It's probably not 150% off or 200% off. It may be 20 or 30% off relative to Magna, but we're close. And it's something that it's on the table for consideration, some kind of adoption. I think it also shows some responsibility. If you're worried about the Wild Wild West, if someone's worried about the Wild Wild West returning, then maybe this brings some calmness to those concerns. that we are thinking in those terms. We are looking at things hard. We are replacing the assets. We are maintaining the assets and so forth. I mean, this is a beautiful room that we're all sitting in here today. But if you wanted to last for 50 years, the carpet will be changed out about 6 or 7 or 8 times.
Right.
The paint on the wall needs to be put on about a dozen times. The ceiling tiles need to be replaced. And quite frankly, you'd have to replace the entire air conditioning system over that period of time, maybe a couple times. And so that's the kind of things that, to keep these assets going. And then it takes a lot of dollars. I'd be happy to respond to any questions that anybody may have.
Would this be more like a recommended policy for the Board of Governors?
It very well could be.
Uh-huh.
Because in our discussions, we hear little bits and pieces about this whole thing, and over here we have a deferred maintenance discussion, or we have a new building construction, or we have a replacement building. It all sort of ties it all together into one purpose. I think also, I think the element of control is important. I'd like to see more shifting of control away from Tallahassee and into the care and custody of the Board of Governors.
Okay. So in a way, this would be, help me to understand it, that moving forward with our initiatives as we develop them into the immediate, the medium, and the longer term, this would be more like a policy or a management of the facilities, a change in that.
Very well could be. And that vertical stripe, which is that 2025,
Yeah.
that's our master plan goal. And say, if we set a goal and we want to say one of those goals is we want to have the average age of all of our assets at 20, then what does that mean in terms of getting from today at 28 down to 20? If we want to have enough dollars in the kitty to get stabilized and how many dollars we need for maintenance, that gives us a goal again to say how do we achieve that? And then of course we got our growth. If we're going to go from 300,000 FTEs to 350,000 FTEs, whatever that number is, we've got to have those spaces to receive those students and have that infrastructure and achieve all those goals that were laid out on the front page of this document as the #1 state with the #1 education, #1 employed work product, and I think everybody will buy into it.
Chris?
Well, first, Clint, thank you for doing this. I really like that it's a holistic framework, it's a comprehensive framework. I think this certainly will be, very useful as we put together a report. As we put all the pieces together, I think somebody is going to say, what are the revenues you're really proposing? What would the revenues look like over time? And then again, what would the uses look like over time? This answers the question at one blush. So I said, you don't just mean new facilities, do you, Chris? I'm like, no, I mean, maintenance, replacement over time. And I know the bottom line doesn't exactly match up with my 250, but it's in the ballpark. And I think that kind of just shows, we did this independently even though we talked to each other, and I think it just shows, your bottom line is also constrained by the revenues you project going in. And I think whatever we do, that has to be a framework that we say, it has to be a balanced sum. That's one of the flaws of the current process, with PICO. It's forced to be balanced, but it's not really need-based. It's like, what do we have available? That's what we have to spend. And that doesn't necessarily mean that has anything to do with need. As we know today, the need is much greater than the available PICO spend. So I just really appreciate the framework, and I think we can use that certainly to support the overall picture of what we're doing. And I know Matt had shared this, and he thought it had some good value as well.
Yeah, and I think you summarized it well. It put together some of our recommendations on the revenue side and then tied back to, what our need really was and the uses. And it, as you said, a nice framework.
All right. Dick,
Yeah,
Governor Barrett.
Is there any way to tie back in the PICO funds as these bonds burn off and you're going to get new revenues over the next 15 or 20 years? You've got them all in here at zero if I'm reading this right, and there will be more, and I don't want to give them up.
Governor, I appreciate that point. The thought process is that the assumption is you've pretty much maxed out our credit card relative to what money is coming in from PICO under its current form with the utility tax. Technology could change that a year from now. And people consume less utilities and putting more strain on the ability to repay that. But there's no, to your point, there's no reason why you couldn't reinstate and still use that utility tax. That's all open for discussion, and if you have it, if you want to hang on to it, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Next, we have some information submitted by Mantra, and I don't know if anybody wants to discuss this right now, but as you have time, please feel free to talk to Chris and the staff about it. Chris, you want to deal with it at all? It's in your packet under the Mantra logo.
Just really briefly, if anybody does want to discuss it, after the meeting or at any time, and as I said before, we're starting to get a lot of, I would say, unsolicited, hey,
Yeah.
I got a great idea, and they are in many cases very good ideas. There's a great interest. There's a lot of equity out there, and this has been mentioned, consistently throughout the task force, and I think we'll continue to get great recommendations, great, I guess I'd say, ideas. And to the extent, where, it's great that there's the support out there for the universities and the desire. They know we're good partners, when they do involve us. And I think, as we write the report, we'll try to glean from this support. I think when the report comes out, we'll get even more letters like this. I know even in the last few days, I've received other, letters, other things of support saying, hey, this is what you're doing is great. We can help. And I think, but it does still come back to the idea of we have to have some changes to board policy and also some changes statutory to allow us to do the things that we're doing. Because I would say this, President Bench, this, the university staff, they're smart people.
Yep.
They have figured out every way every flexibility provision has been explored. And, there's nothing new under the sun, so we need something new. And I think that's great that people are excited about that we might have the chance to do something new.
But I wasn't thrown out of anywhere. I wasn't told to go away. I was met with eager ears, to tell you the truth. Some folks said, no, I'm not going to entertain that, and yes, I like that. So I think we're really on the right track with the right approach. Helping ourselves, coming up with new ideas, not begging, not whining, not crying over spilt milk. What we're trying to do is use our good brains and our good staffs and educate the students that are going to come through our universities and meet the strategic plan of the Board of Governors. I mean, that's a good sell. And so I want to thank everybody for doing what you're doing, for coming up with ideas and throwing them at us. The next goal is to work on a fuller draft and have a full draft by the middle of next month. We're going to circulate the next draft to all the members of the task force and the advisors, and they'll come from Chris. And you can reply. If you reply to all, you can do that if you want everybody to see your comments. But be careful to send them to Chris. The Sunshine Law is there. You can copy everyone when you reply to staff. However, you can't reply to each other. Like if Bill has a comment or something I think is just great or needs to be modified, I'm not going to email Bill and say what I'll email Chris and say, I like this idea of Bill's, right? Okay, or I want to tweak it a certain way. And just communicate through staff. So our goal is to have a report done by the next draft by mid-October so that the final report can be included in the November Board of Governors packet. However, it may take longer depending on what Chair Beard decides once he sees our final draft, but regardless, it will be complete for him to pass judgment on for the November meeting. I do not anticipate having another formal task force meeting as we are having today. However, I hope that each of you can participate in the November Facilities Committee meeting of the Board of Governors. Along the same lines, as these concepts are advanced, we may need to call on you to help explain something, tweak something. Ask Debbie, can we walk in the door with this? And she'll say no, and she'll say walk in the door with that. Someone say, I don't want to hear 5%, I want to hear more general. That's the way these things are going to evolve. And what we finally recommend to the board, and what the board recommends to go forward with, and what happens in the legislature are 4 different things. Sausage will be made, and that's okay. We need some new sausage, and we're providing some new ingredients. Thank you very much. The lawyers, the lobbyists, the provosts, the CFOs, everyone is watching us. I think that we're doing our due diligence as much as we possibly can. Governor Coulson and Governor Beard, thank you for this opportunity. And is there any other thing that anybody wants to add, subtract, multiply, or divide? I would be happy to call the President of Florida Gulf Coast to come and tell us about lunch.
Lunch is going to be very good.
Thank you, Brad.
What I'd like to do is just ask a member of our staff to kind of give you directions on how to get there. And again, I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
Thank you for letting us have this room, President Bradshaw. This morning has been excellent.
Lunch will be in Sutton Hall, which is the building right next door to us. So if you just head down the stairs, there'll be students to guide you along your way.
Good. Thank you.